All right, go for it.
Good day, good to wherever the heck in the world you are. It's that time again. It's the Sirius Report with London Paul. And because you know it's London Paul, you know you're going to get a litany of great ideas and insights. And folks, look, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to his subscriber services over at theseriusreport.com. The links will be on the bottom. Paul has some inside track information that he will not be disclosing publicly. It's strictly for podcast members only of this, his special subscriber base. Inside information as to the regards and what's going on with Bannon, inside baseball of what's happening in the White House. So if you want to know those juicy details, you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna have to subscribe for less than a price of a latte at Starbucks. You can get the inside baseball on global events, or in this case, the inside cricket on global events with London Paul. What's going on, Paul? How are you, buddy?
Yeah, I'm very well, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. And how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm just geopolitically speaking, just going from one heart attack to the next stroke to another heart attack. How about you?
Yeah, there's a huge amount going on, and it's kind of changing almost. It used to be on a monthly basis, then it got to a weekly, and now it's an almost daily, and
Yeah.
sometimes a twice daily event. But yeah, and so yeah, I thought we'd start talking about cryptos, and I might bore some people talking about it in very simple detail, but I want to go step through this. So basically, what is a blockchain, all that. And the reason I'm going to do this is because then we're going to go through the things that the Chinese and the Russians see as teething problems with the current setup,
Hmm.
what they're exactly proposing to do in the future. And I'm not saying this is detrimental to anything that currently exists. I'm just stating the fact.
Yeah.
And and I'll also state the fact I'm not anti-cryptocurrencies. I hugely like blockchain. I'm not against them. I'm a bit nervous of investing myself because of the volatility, but that's my just my opinion. But I'm making it clear so because I don't want people later on coming on going you're dissing cryptos, and I'm not. I'm absolutely not doing that. But I just want to lay out what the Chinese and the Russians are doing because I think it's very interesting and it is different. It's not what currently is out there, and their intentions are pretty clear. But anyway, just to lay it sort of out, I mean, from a blockchain perspective, a lot of people talk about blockchain, and it's not always clear necessarily to everyone, and there's going to be new people listening. So, obviously, blockchain records data in a digital ledger of transactions, and they have to be independently recorded and verified as having occurred. So then, this ledger is distributed potentially up to thousands of nodes, computers basically around the world. So every participant sees an updated version of the ledger. The great thing is this distributed approach is seen as a mechanism to reduce the risk of hacking because you'd simultaneously have to hack all nodes that have access to the ledger. Well, that's highly unlikely it's going to happen. So that's what makes blockchain in essence a really superb piece of technology. So how does it work? Well, digital records within the ledger are joined together into blocks, and then they're bound together securely and in sequence to form chains. And that's a process called hashing. And once a ledger is updated, it can't be altered as only further additions can be made. So obviously the hashing process offers the advantage that the data is secure because it can't be converted back into the original data, which is another excellent feature of it. So we're talking very positively about the whole aspect of blockchain and cryptos. Now, in order to confirm your coin's valid, if you create one, others must reproduce the signature on the coin you've claimed to have mined. So, in addition to prevent your coin from being duplicated, either counterfeited, um, which is obviously extremely important, that's the case. Whenever you exchange it with someone else, they obviously effectively have to put a signature on the coin, and that transaction has to be published and the signature is verified by a number of others before the spend's considered to be a good transaction. And that's perfect. That's how it should be. And once it's considered good, then the ownership of the coin passes to someone else. Now, obviously, this is a very kind of drawn out process. This doesn't happen at the rate I'm talking, but it's just to explain the process. So I know people have fears about it, so we're just talking through exactly how it works and why it's a positive thing in that regard. So, and through that mechanism, you get the transfer of a given coin from its mining onwards, and it can be just traced there on after. And thus it's impossible for someone to duplicate the coin. Very important, you don't have counterfeit coins. Now, digital currencies are basically the same thing. There's usually a finite number of coins at inception, and each coin has its own cryptographic key, and that's got to effectively be discovered, and that's the mining process that exists. Now, Bitcoin's obviously very popular, high in demand, but as we go along, they get harder and harder to mine. And that's written into the code, and it's designed to stop Bitcoin being inflationary, which of course makes sense. However, there are slight concerns because therefore at some point, Bitcoin will become deflationary. Now, is that a major problem? I don't know at this point in time, but that's a fact. At some point, it becomes deflationary. Now, in the concept of sound money, whatever you believe that to be, it's a store of value, a measure of value, and a standard of value, as well as the kind of medium of exchange. Now, this is where, for me, it gets kind of interesting. And from the Chinese and Russian perspective, this is where they start to kind of see things slightly differently. Because obviously, for something to have a price, it must in some form, for a period of time, have store value. And that's why the creators of digital currencies ensure this through this deflationary design. But the problem is that in order to get value out of this non-physical item, there has to be this medium of exchange, which is exactly what exchanges do. So that in turn requires this wide acceptance by individuals and people transacting in the coin. Fine, that's not a problem. Now, as the number of coins in circulation inevitably decreases due to its deflationary design, then ultimately you have this problem where individuals and firms, you have to lose some for the transaction to continue. And this can impact this medium of exchange. And this is where the Chinese and the Russians start to go, hang on, we see all this positive aspect to do with cryptocurrencies currently, but we see deficiencies in terms of the design. So, and they ignore the fear. Yeah, I've heard lots of fear, and let's be quite clear about this. People are fearful that it'll create a cashless society. It won't create a cashless society. They're also fearful about this control over financial transactions, because at some point someone could instigate laws and change everything and say, well, we're taking control of it. Yes, they could. Is it going to happen? I think it's very unlikely.
Right.
Also, this fear that Bitcoin's designed to create a one world currency, that absolutely isn't going to happen. And decentralization, yes, and people are fearful because then governments intervene in law. I don't see that happening. It's a risk. Yes, I'm not saying it's because we can't ever say nothing's possible, but I wouldn't get too bent out of shape about it. Now, the old internet goes dark issue. Yes, you have problems, but the internet's not going to stay dark forever. So that's not a problem. EMP attacks, yes, that could be a real issue. And no one's saying there's going to be an EMP attack imminently or anything like that. But yes, an EMP attack could cause major problems to any cryptocurrency exchange. It doesn't matter whether it's the current lot, what the Chinese and the Russians proposing to do. Now, what I'll do is I'll explain what the Chinese and the Russians are proposing to do. I'm not saying it's the way things should be done. I'm not, defending it, criticizing it. I'm just stating it as a matter of fact. Now, their intention is they're going to roll these out globally. It will be decentralized. It's going to be asset-backed, probably gold. It will utilize blockchain. Now, I know immediately people say, hang on, it's going to be asset-backed. How the hell is this possible? Because there's centralization. But this is the beauty of blockchain from their perspective, because all the world's physical gold and silver can get registered on blockchain.
Yep.
So it means it's still fungible, which means it's mutually interchangeable, but it removes the need to have the endless shipment of metals. And the other thing is only verified physical metals can be traded, which would be on the blockchain. Right. It prevents the corruption problems. We know, like tungsten bars, like the Chinese were sent. And who knows who else has been sent Duff gold bars in the past.
Right.
And in essence, blockchain will verify the purity and veracity of physical metals. So the blockchain technology makes this superb.
Yeah,
and
even
precious metal.
And Paul, when you couple that with smart contracts, it's powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Now, precious metals are already defined by what is termed good delivery standard. Now, this needs better organization globally. There's no doubt about it. But if you integrate blockchain then it becomes a very powerful medium. And China and Russia are pretty well advanced in this regard in what they're doing, and they intend to launch it. But there's some other very important points to make. Cryptocurrencies are not going to replace regular currencies. China will still have a gold-backed yuan. Right. Russia will still have gold-backed rubles, and all these other countries we've listed who are tend will all retain their currency. We're not going to have this disintegration of normal currencies. And in essence, by doing this, what they think will make it more viable is it will create less volatility in the price, because yes, initially there'll be a kind of a bit of normal trading. You'll go up and down, move all around, but eventually you'll find equilibrium with the price of the asset, which is the gold backing, and therefore it gives it more stability. Now, ultimately, if cryptocurrencies are going to be adopted more universally, there needs to be more stability in its price, because at the moment, even if I go on, and this is a very simple example, but and I'll just keep the math simple. If $1 was worth, or $1 equals 1 Bitcoin, obviously it doesn't, but let's keep it simple. Now, if I have huge volatility, but I'm selling something for 1 Bitcoin, but actually, obviously, currently I'm still having to trade out because I live in the real world where I have to pay things in dollars. I mean, the uptake in cryptocurrencies is gradually, taking shape, but it's still a long way off being universally accepted. So you still have to live in a world paying in dollars, pounds, or whatever else. Now, if with extreme volatility, I sell my product for 1 Bitcoin, but the exchange rate means that tomorrow or whenever, it's suddenly $1 is 2 Bitcoins. Now, the problem is, if I'm sat there and I'm selling this for 1 Bitcoin, the thing that I was originally selling for $1, now I'm selling it for 50 cents. Now, that's the problem we currently have. It's a very crude, simple example, but it's why there needs to be less volatility. It's great for trading. I mean, for example, I got told yesterday that apparently, I think it was maybe Saturday or maybe Friday, in one single day, there was $10 billion worth of cryptocurrencies traded. That shows the extent. The trading is enormous. There's a huge amount of interest in it. It's debatable how many people invest long term, but that doesn't matter. If people trade in and out and make money, that's great. That's what they want to do. Fine. I don't have any objections to people doing that. That's not the problem. But if to have long-term stability, it can't have this kind of level of volatility. At some point, it has to find a happy medium where it will work in the real environment. If cryptocurrencies get taken up on board by the average person in the street, the volatility has to go. Now, that's a concern from the Chinese and Russians' perspective, which is why they are launching what they would say is second generation cryptocurrencies. They're not unique in this. There's somebody in Europe who I know who's worked on one for a number of years that's supposed to come out in the next couple of months. It's under wraps currently. When it's not under wraps, I'll discuss it more and we can talk about that. And that's asset backed as well, but in a slightly different way, not from what the Russians and the Chinese are doing. So I think it's important just to emphasize these are developments. It's to make people aware of what's going on in the world. It doesn't mean people should invest in what the Russians and the Chinese are doing, and it doesn't mean people should not invest in cryptocurrencies as they are now, or how to trade in them, or do whatever they want to do. But there are big changes coming, and I think undoubtedly in the future blockchain is going to, and we've said this before, become a huge technology game changer across the globe. How cryptocurrencies integrate into all that and what happens is it's difficult to predict. No one can really say, because it's like the early days of the internet. Things have radically changed over the years, and they're going to radically change again. And it's probably a good point to mention. You did the discussion about DTube and how it's going to revolutionize the kind of file sharing for videos, etc. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The big players, the Facebooks, the Googles, YouTube, and all these they won't know what's hit them, because all this new tech's going to come out that's not going to restrict people. I mean, apart from if it's grossly offensive, or is a content that everyone would find offensive and disgusting, then fine. But generally, people will have the freedom to express things and discuss things and not be censored. And and also, be demonetized. There are big changes. So technologically, there are massive changes coming in that regard. And the whole cryptocurrencies is just part of that. The tech revolution is definitely coming, but it's like any tech revolution. There's going to be the winners and the losers. Not everything's going to survive. No one's got a crystal ball, and no one can truly say precisely what is going to win and what isn't. And that's not really the point, but the point is there are changes coming about. How quickly the Chinese and the Russians roll this out, I don't know. I mean, they always are far in advance to what they let the rest of the world onto. The issue is when it does get rolled out, what's the interest, what's the uptake, and how does this impact current cryptocurrencies? That is open to debate. No one really knows. It might turn out that most of the world doesn't take any notice and aren't interested in it. On the other hand, there could be a large uptake. No one at this time can say definitively what's going to happen. But I think their intent to roll it out globally is a pretty telling statement. And I'm speculating here, we've talked a lot about gold trade notes, and I've done for a number of years. I suspect that could be a medium where blockchain could be used, where
Absolutely.
nations will trade with each other, and then it's all settled in terms of gold at the end of quarterly, 6 monthly, yearly, however nations want to work. So there are huge benefits to using blockchain. It's in some ways blockchain may end up dwarfing even the whole cryptocurrency itself, and then the blockchain aspect that backs the cryptocurrency is going to give it huge more impetus and value. And I think undoubtedly there'll be huge challenges to the financial system. It's not going to happen overnight. I think it will challenge probably a lot of traditional industries in terms of how they operate. And it is underpinned, as we say, by superb technology. I think it's probably the most interesting technology I've seen in many, many years. I come from the era where we didn't have mobile phones, didn't have, when I was young, didn't have, PCs, didn't have laptops or anything like that. So I've seen some big, huge technological changes, but I think blockchain probably usurps all of those in terms of its potential and it's where it's capable of being integrated. And the great thing is it will prevent a lot of fraud. Now, the issue when you start to hear, I heard you talk about Congress getting involved in terms of currencies, and it's a bit cryptic, pardon the pun, as to what they're intending to do. But I do have slight concerns when you hear government's been involved. But the one thing is, at some point, undoubtedly, there is going to become some involvement, because legislation will come about where someone will say, well, hang on, it's fine to have cryptocurrencies, but they're going to want to start taxing people on their profits they make. I think this is an inevitability at some point. And then when that happens, the question then is, okay, well, how's that framework going to be put in place? How do people declare it? What's going to happen? I think that is a real, in the UK now, in theory, people should, and if they don't, they're breaking the law. They're supposed to declare profits they make on cryptocurrencies as what we call capital gains tax. And you have to pay, depending on your income, sort of like 20% and higher. I can't remember the top end thing. Now, that is also a possibility. Now, the concern I would have is meddling by governments that don't need to. It's all well and good saying, well, we're concerned about anti-money laundering. Yes. Okay, that's fair enough. But how many people are just genuinely just trading in and out, trying to make a few, dollars or whatever, accumulate Bitcoin, whatever they want to do, or any other cryptocurrency? But there are certainly elements who might use this, but it's not the spirit of the law that's the problem. It's the interpretation and how it's applied, because we've known in history that the law's not applied to us mere mortals as compared to some people who can break every law, or corporations and individuals for that matter. So, but I think that will get addressed in the future. Bear in mind, this all comes on the back of big changes happening globally, the whole new paradigm, the whole reset, and where the whole way governments operate is going to change. It's not going to happen overnight. And don't imagine that the cabal goes and it changes. It might take a decade, it might take 5 years. I don't know. Nobody knows at this point. But there are big changes, and there's no doubt cryptocurrencies have a massive future. But I think it's like any stage of technological development, there are challenges. I think there are teething problems the way Bitcoin operates currently, well, I'm not picking on Bitcoin, probably just cryptocurrencies full stop. Let's not pick on Bitcoin because that's grossly unfair. But there are certain teething problems. I think what the Chinese and the Russians are proposing will address some of them. But when it comes to it working in the real world, how exactly is it going to work? Because there is the issue of, well, yeah, you don't need to move endless shipment of metals around. People will question, well, is it genuine metal it's backed by? And there's naturally going to be skeptical people because they've seen it before. But I remain confident that will be the case.
Yeah.
The question then is, okay, well, if I buy, I don't know, cryptocurrency China, whatever it's called, and I want to buy one of them, and that equates to so much physical metal, can I actually, if I really insist, say, well, I want to take, demand for my metal? I think the truth is, whilst you could do that, why would you bother? Because undoubtedly people will buy cryptocurrencies to trade in and out of. You're not going to, every time you go, right, can you send me the metal? And before you've had the metal sent to you, you've sold it. I mean, it becomes completely unworkable and manageable, and is not a sensible way forward. So I do see there are concerns, and there'll be people bothered by the fact it is backed, asset backed. But if it's decentralized, which it will be, and people say, well, how's that going to work? Well, it will work. That's precisely what they'll do. They're not going to centralize it. But the issue is that the asset itself, you could arguably say, will have to be centralized and located somewhere. But that largely depends how this operation rolls out. And that's the bit we don't know. Is it going to operate solely from Beijing, for argument's sake, and Moscow, or is it they're going to have it rolled out where there's going to be locations all around the world? Maybe that's a possibility, and there will be gold or silver stored appropriately.
Yeah.
If you have silver backing in the future, for example.
And one of the ways I see it working, especially in the current regard, where if one bullion bank sells to another bullion bank, all that's happening is just a move in a ledger that's held by, let's say, the Bank of England or the LBMA or the IMF or whoever, and no one really knows what's actually happening. But I can see a future that's completely decentralized, where whatever metal is there has been verified and digitized, and then put on a smart contract where you can program to the smart contract, okay, I'm going to hold this token, okay, this token, and that token is and that asset has been tokenized, and I'm going to hold this token for X amount of time, and let's just say in 6 months or 12 months, the smart contract states that I'm going to take delivery of it, and it initiates the delivery procedure. I mean, stuff like that. I think the future is bright, man. In that regard, I think we're going to see. I mean, I'd love to see the COMEX destroyed with the blockchain.
Well, I think ultimately this is exactly. Eventually, the paper market is going to eviscerate, and I know people are very frustrated about. And I think that's also been, a lot of people have held gold and silver for a long time. They've got very frustrated with no price movement and just fed up. And then they've seen how Bitcoin, for example, has rocketed from in a very short space of time, and they see it as a more viable option. And I can understand perfectly why people see this, but you have to bear in mind that gold and silver has been, and when I say ruthlessly manipulated, is being quite polite. And there are perfectly good reasons for why they're doing that. But at some point, gold and silver might buffet around. It might move up and down a little bit, and it gets to 1,300 gold and then moves back, and it gets up to maybe 1,350 in the region. The real price movement for gold and silver comes when the paper market dies, because then the manipulation's gone. Till then, it's not really worth worrying about. If you can't stand the wait, and I'm not offering investment advice because I'm not in any position to do that. But if I got so fed up with it, then you've got a choice. You can either keep holding it and waiting, or you can divest it and do something else. That's people's individual choice and however they want to approach it. But the reason it's being held is precisely because it is considerably undervalued, whatever anyone says, even in the current market, and notwithstanding inflation or any other economic shock in the future. There's no doubt about that China and Russia don't buy the gold in the East as much as they are just for the sake of it. They're buying it for very good reason, because they are going to back their actual currencies, not cryptocurrencies. Well, that's separate, but obviously that's the intention as well. Buy gold. Mexico may back it with silver, but it's difficult to know at this stage. But gold is probably going to be likely to be the mechanism for a lot of nations. Now, people will say, well, how do you back a currency? But it's not the quantity of the metal that's the issue. And it's a very frivolous example, but for argument's sake, I could back the entire world's currencies with a ton of gold if I re-rate the price of it. Now, I'm not suggesting you can do that, but what I'm suggesting is that the whole re-rating process for gold and silver will come about when they back currencies. And the re-rating means then that it is perfectly feasible for nations to be able to back their currencies with metal. And the other thing is you don't have to 100% back your currency. You don't have to have a 1-for-1. It's not a necessity to do that. The percentage is considerably less because there's no need to back every single pound or every single dollar that's in circulation, because that's not how the world operates. So you can, but certainly that's the rationale. So when people say about re-rating, and I'm not saying a ton of gold's going to buy, would back every currency. I'm just using a very crude example to say the re-rating process, when that comes, will make what seems impossible a reality. And that's the basis of why you have this so-called reset and re-rating. And therefore it becomes perfectly feasible for nations to back their currencies, presuming they've got physical assets, of course, and it may gold, silver, or whatever else it might be for that matter. But that's the reality behind it, that the re-rating makes it a feasible proposition. Although from China and Russia's perspective, they could back their currency now with metal at the price it is, and they would be okay. I mean, that's the difference. So obviously, when the re-rating comes from their perspective, it gives them additional metal where they, for example, yes, they can back cryptocurrencies with gold in an asset-backed world. I think, are we on mute?
It's okay. Did you drop? I think V may have dropped. So
okay, well we can we can carry on. But I mean, I want to also say,
I'm here. Sorry about that.
Okay, no, that's okay.
Hey, no worries, don't worry. We also have to be just very finally on this subject, not to be so, there's a lot of fear mongering and there's a lot of fear out there about things. And I've heard a lot of stories which and you have to take it with a pinch of salt and or a grain of salt, because you have to be extremely careful. There is, and there is a lot of people out there who are very polarized about this. And I think that's equally dangerous. You don't have to be on either side of the fence. You can be in both camps, in one camp or neither camp, but you don't have to have a polarized view regarding the future. They can coexist. They will coexist, and it's not to the detriment of either of them. And I think that's probably an important point that's worth making.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's also a lot of misinformation with people that just don't understand the simple technology. They've done no research to it, but yet they want to get on a podium and start talking about it and scaring the crap out of people. Something new. We had to deal with that recently. But
well, the thing is, I wouldn't do. The problem is it doesn't. I can understand people having fears and concerns. I can understand people also being a little bit too exuberant about the investments too. And so it swings both ways, but it's not. It's not helpful. I take the view. I'll take a balanced view. Look, even if I was completely against something and I really didn't agree with it, I'm not going to sit there and just diss it on the grounds that I don't like something. If there's some solid reasons for concerns, fine. And I think what the whole sort of cryptocurrency communities, and for that matter, precious metal, there needs to be a meeting of minds and say, okay, let's have a mature, sensible discussion about this, and that things can coexist. But equally, we've had some pretty prominent people dissing Bitcoin and dissing cryptocurrencies, and for whatever reason they're doing it, it's difficult to understand, because the basis of their argument doesn't wash with me. Yes, I do have concerns, but it's like any technology. It's early days. It's like if you went back to when the first car came on the road, they don't really look like they do now, but people are still driving around there, and they are now. But it's not. It's a bit of a simple analogy, but the point is that technology will take time to evolve, and this is very, very early days. It's in its infancy, and it's got a long way to go. And
Absolutely.
in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we'll look back and go, wow, the evolution in this sphere has been enormous, and it will start to impact everybody's lives. But also the idea that everybody's going to start buying and trading or selling and buying in cryptocurrencies just isn't realistic at this point in time. But 5-10 years down the track, I'm expecting massive changes in the financial sector out of all recognition, and maybe what we think's not likely now is going to become very much a probability or a possibility, at least in the future. So never rule anything out. We're not a static world. Things change rapidly
Right.
as we see in other spheres of life. So why will technology not evolve? We're due a kind of technological revolution that actually works, though.
Yeah.
And not these kind of false. I mean, the dot-com era, just when a lot of money was pumped into it, but a lot of these businesses had no real business model. It was just venture capital gone crazy, and it was always going to blow up and burst. And some people made a fortune out of it, and some people got stung badly. And we need to get away from this kind of exuberance or over exuberance in technology. But equally, we need to be warred against the fear angle that people will present. I mean, if people have got concerns, fine, articulate them, but discuss them in a pragmatic, simple, logical way. And that will stimulate debate, because in the end, we want a cryptocurrency in the future that works for everyone, and not kind of just works for a few people. It has to be something that has a long-term sustainable future, because if it doesn't, then it will become another bubble in history, and there'll some people do well out of it, and some people will get stung badly. And the last thing we want is more people getting stung by financial systems that have stung them for longer than we can imagine. And I'm not lumping cryptocurrencies in with the financial system, but that's the best way to equate it, that people get hit in their pockets, is that has to stop and has to end. And certainly the technology that underpins it does prevent the huge problems that exist. And if you get the rest of the financial system on that kind of footing, it's going to make a huge difference, and it will revolutionize the financial system across the globe in the process.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Paul, switching gears. What is the latest, especially with the Middle East? Any updates you can give us on Europe, and all the shenanigans and drama that's happening here in DC that you can disclose that without maybe some juicy tidbits without
Okay, well, Syria,
giving away the farm here.
yeah, Syria. Well, Syria is an interesting example. I mean, there was the whole kind of discussion that Trump was pulling the CIA out effectively and taking the funds away from those operations, and was a lot of speculation. Was this reality, or was it just a fiction? Well, it is reality, but what's kind of interesting about the reality of it is that when the idea that the Russians and the US don't talk is nonsense. I mean, even going back to the height of the Cold War in the 60s or whenever else, the back channels were very strong between both nations. And even the Cuban Missile Crisis was, from what I understand, and I think it's reliable, that it was never a reality that we were going to have a nuclear war. And those back channels exist today. They're very strong to prevent precisely, something could happen. There could be an accident. Something, it's to prevent a kind of something's happened and the other side overreacts, and before we know it, we've got World War III. And I'm not saying that's a likelihood, but it's to prevent those kind of things, and it's to share information and discuss things and make sure that there isn't some preemptive strike based on ridiculous intelligence or whatever else. Now, when it comes to Syria, there is very strong back channels between the Russians and the Chinese, now the Russians and the US. Now, what happened is, some time ago, the Russians contacted the US and said, look, basically, we're going to have this, we're just going to now, have this kind of real emphasis of really finally annihilating ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call it. Now, we just want to make sure that none of your operatives are on the ground in the process, because we don't want to kill any of them.
Right.
And the Americans came back and said, no, there's none of our operatives in the field. They've been, that is not the case anymore. And then, of course, now we're seeing on a virtual daily basis all this precision bombing, which is taking out and gutting Daesh, literally. I mean, there's a lot of them now surrendering, they're deserting, and people who are surrendering are going, we just want to end this, we've lost, we know it's over, and we just don't want to fight anymore. And that's where the back channel exists. Now, by all accounts, I think the reason that back channel got stronger and there was more discussion was because exactly the Russians don't want to be killing US operatives in the field. Now, that might surprise people, but that's how the relationship works. There's all the media and the hype and the nonsense that says, yeah, there is big problems in terms of sanctions and whatever, but on a level, whilst sanctions exist and those associated problems, nations are not going to go to war and wreck the earth in the process. That just makes great column inches in newspapers to terrify people and sell newspapers or sell YouTube clips or whatever else in the process. So that's an important distinction between what people think is reality and what actually is reality. And most certainly, the developments in Syria kind of, and I put this, and I'm going to feed this into what's going on in Europe. And I know someone came on because I put a short YouTube clip out about developments in Europe and what was going on. And maybe I didn't explain it properly, but I said, look, the rationale is that these sleeper cells have existed, and I've talked about this for a long time, that sleeper cells exist throughout Europe. Of that, there's absolutely no doubt. Now, the question is, why do they suddenly activate them? Why not activate it a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever? And the whole basis for activation is, from my perspective now, is because the war in the Middle East, they've lost. They're losing badly. And they know there's no future to it. Because these terrorist cells, or the whole basis of the terrorism, is to try and create this global terrorist threat ad infinitum. And they're not now, a lot of these, under control, where people feel, oh, well, they're controlled by the CIA, they're controlled by UK MI6, or they're under the cabal, the deep state control, all these terror cells. They don't anymore. They've gone rogue. Why have they gone rogue? Because they were probably given assurances in the likes of Syria that they all thought it was a done deal. They'd win the war, Assad would be gone, and that'd be the end of it. And they feel let down by their previous handlers, for want of a better word, in the West. And that's why they're now going, right, we're going to wreak revenge and start attacking Europe. I don't know whether anything will spread to the US. It's debatable at this point in time whether that happens or doesn't. But certainly, if we look at what happened at the weekend, and I'm not going to go into repeating everything I said in the YouTube clip, which is obviously free to everyone to listen, but there is no doubt you don't have a Moroccan attack happening in Barcelona and something happening which was also Moroccan based that was in Finland. This is not a coincidence. There is a connection, and the suggestion is that there is a network that runs all the way through Southern Europe, all the way up into Northern Europe. And I made the point a while ago that the future problems for the world would be cyber terrorism and just this global terrorist threat, and the world need to grow up and get together and resolve the problems. Now you're seeing why this is a problem. Now, does it mean it's going to escalate completely out of control? No one knows. No one knows, because that's the basis of terror threats. No one can say when they're going to happen, how they're going to happen. But I think we've entered a phase where it's going to be likely to increase and start to become a major problem in relative terms. And that's, of course, is by design, because what do they want to do? It's a bit like, we can talk about the US and the whole kind of alt-left, alt-right thing in a minute, but it's a way of polarizing people. The first thing everyone blames in Europe is, it's all the immigration that caused this. The immigrants flooding into Europe who are causing all the problem. Well, it turns out that the people who are responsible for what went on in Barcelona were natives to the country. They were born there. They may be of Moroccan descent, but they weren't refugees or immigrants piling into the country. So we have to get over that illusion. Yes, it will happen at times, but a lot of the time it isn't. Sleeper cells will exist in nations for years on end. They don't just suddenly appear, randomly. That's why they're sleeper cells. So we have to get over. But that's the idea of trying to divide and conquer and blame people. And in a very small point, the alt-left, alt-right thing is, just don't fall for this crap. Don't position yourself where you can be accused of being one or the other, and there's some ridiculous things of people being accused of being alt-right people when they're not, because they vocalize on it or say something that then they use to bash them over the head in the process. People need to get away from it. Don't reinforce it. Don't give it oxygen. Because it will die out. But the more people give it oxygen, the more people start to become polarized. And what are they trying to do in the US? They want to polarize people on one side or the other. It was Democrat and Republican. Now it's you're alt-left, alt-right. If you're not alt-left, you must be alt-right. Or if you're not alt-right, you're alt-left. People need to, don't get sucked into that. It will die a death. It will not survive. But the more oxygen it gets, and there's too many people in the alt media who are just pushing this angle day in, day out, stoking up, they're realizing they've got big audiences. People read it. It starts to get people to be positioned. They want to do this. They want a position. They'd love to polarize the entire nation down the middle. Because what does that do? It stokes up more civil unrest. They are desperate for civil unrest. It's the same in Europe. It's a last flung attempt to wreak havoc in Europe and in the US for that matter. And people just don't get sucked into it, because if you do, all you're going to do is it will just drive you insane reading it all, and it is, a lot of it is extremely annoying from whatever perspective. But if you just ignore it, it will go away. It needs the oxygen of publicity. It needs people to sort of focus on it and to discuss things, and then to make a comment so someone can come and bash them over that and pigeonhole them as being something or something else is a big problem. And we spoke about it in different contexts before, but that is the game. And why are they doing this? Well, because they've lost the war.
Breaking news, Paul. The Barcelona van attacker has been arrested in Barcelona. Just breaking.
Wow. Well, there's talk that he may have escaped back over the border into France, which would have been indicative that, because if you've got the Pyrenees, the mountainous region, it's probably a great way for people to move between the two countries. But and then there's people as well who say, oh, it's not real. No one died. No one was injured. No, people did die. People were injured. It's a reality, and unfortunately, this is what happens when you go to nations in the world and you destroy them, as the West has done, and you you back and fund terrorist organization. While they're winning, they're not going to. But as soon as they start losing, they turn their anger back onto the nations who were responsible for financing and funding them and helping them to exist and operate. And that's what we're starting to see. I think they're in the US. That isn't going to work, and that's why they're trying a different tactic of, well, let's divide and conquer people on the alt left, alt right situation, and that there's no doubt both are happening simultaneously. There's no coincidences in terms of these operations and why they happen, at least from my perspective anyway. So I do see the terror threat in Europe becoming a bigger problem, and all nations have got to do is grow up, start to share intelligence, and when they get told that there is a potential issue with somebody, act on it and deal with it. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, they're just turning a blind eye because they're playing the game. But the problem is, someone told me who actually I was speaking to a couple of weeks ago, who's retired from the police in the UK and worked in the Met in London, said you wouldn't believe the resources that has to be put on one individual to have them under surveillance 24/7. Bearing in mind, you don't want them to realise that they're under surveillance 24/7, otherwise they just won't do anything. The whole point you put people under surveillance is to catch them out doing the very things they're doing. And they said you need something like 10 people per person. Now, if in the UK there's rumoured to be 20,000 potential, people who need to be under surveillance, they don't have the resources for 200,000, officers or intelligence operatives, whoever it might be, to manage this process. That is a big problem. But it's not a problem that we should just ignore and turn over and pretend it's not a problem when it absolutely is a problem. And then, of course, the thing without sensationalizing things, there was all the gas canisters they found in Barcelona, which would imply they were going to try something else on a far more serious level, rather than just, not that carjacking and running people
And
over
Paul,
is
we just have
serious,
breaking
because it
news,
is.
Paul. We just have breaking news. A car just hit a group of people waiting for a bus in Marseille, France. This just happened.
Yeah, and I hate to say, well, this is what I've been saying, but I mean, we talked about this probably one of the first times I was on. I can't remember when, but we talked about this, amongst ourselves. I've spoken about it. I've written about it for a long, long time, saying, there has to be a mature, sensible approach. This isn't going to go away. And the
Right.
problem in the process is it will just also have a secondary effect that people will start to blame anybody who's a migrant, that you're a terrorist, you're a problem. It's rather like the alt left, all right. They'll just, it's inevitable it will happen, and it will be absolutely disastrous for everybody in the process. Now, what's the answer is very difficult. We can talk about it as much as we like and understand the logic and the reasoning behind what needs to be done, but it's very different in terms of implementing it. The only thing I think it will do is, if these things continue to happen, and let's hope they don't, but if they do, it will start to raise people's awareness. It'll start to wake people up, and they'll say, hang on, you need to do something about this. And that is the only hope we can take. I mean, if you can ever take a positive out of negatives, that's the one thing, because it needs that galvanizing of people to say enough's enough, and we're not going to put up with, and realize what's ultimately why these things are happening, and why they're now turning on the very nations who in the past have financed them and funded them and trained them, etc. And there's no doubt the West's totally culpable of doing that. I mean, we don't know every nation involved, but pretty much how many NATO nations in some way are culpable in this respect? Absolutely they are. And it's the old saying, what you sow, you shall reap. And unfortunately, they're reaping some very serious consequences in the process.
Yeah, absolutely correct, man. Paul, closing comments, sir. What else is on your radar, and how can people follow you?
Yeah, I think we need to, we've talked, I mean, I went on the X22 and talked about this in some detail, but the US economy, I mean, I'm hearing lots of noise about imminent this and imminent that, and I'm not going to, get bogged down on dates or anything, because no one can actually be sure. But undoubtedly, if the more we look into the US economy, I mean, it is collapsing in every sense of the word. I mean,
Yep.
there's all the unfunded liabilities, the bankrupt states, the evaporating pension fund. And I put an article out about the destructive cycle that the US economy is in, and it's not just the US; it's other economies in the process. And this is another reason why there is this attempt to kind of then destabilize it with the whole alt left, alt right. Things don't happen coincidentally. I'm sorry, they do happen coincidentally, because it's exactly the time when people are beginning to really suffer. That when people are struggling, they'll turn to things because they'll think it may be a solution to their problems, even though in reality it isn't. And of course, many people are struggling in the US. Of that, there's no doubt. Unemployment's a lot higher, people's declining wages, part-time jobs, etc. So people are struggling, and of course, the US has the added problem that there's the rejection of the US dollar. There's people dumping treasury bonds, and of course, there's the whole debt situation and all the fiddling, all the massaging, all the figures to create the illusion. But the average person in the US is going to start struggling. People are struggling in the UK. You can see if you go into, supermarkets or anything, all the food that's on offer is empty. There's nothing, and all the stuff that's full price, a lot of it's hardly sold. I've increasingly seen that in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And that's because people are struggling. And of course they will, because all economies are in decline. And that just adds to the fact that's a reality now. And we've talked about this, that actually one point probably worth making actually regarding the whole kind of situation with the US, and CJ mentioned this just very briefly, Afghanistan. Now, the vote on that's going to be interesting because of what Trump's proposals are. Are they going to increase troop allocation to Afghanistan? If they do, it's only for one reason, because the US economy is ailing so badly. they need to make sure the Taliban don't prevent the opium trade coming through. And if you look historically, and there's a precedent for this, when the US was in decline in 2001, around that time, look at the US economic stats and what subsequently happened. When they went into Afghanistan, no prizes for guessing that it's being propped up by the opium trade. I mean, that's irrefutable. That is another reason why, because the US economy is struggling so much, that they'll do that, because they want to reinforce and make sure that trade still comes through, because in inverted commas, it's lucrative to them. And very sadly, there's very damaging consequences, which is why we've seen this huge opium epidemic. And it's not just in the US, it's also, in the UK and Europe and beyond. There's been a massive epidemic because the market's flooded with cheap opium or heroin. So, I mean, that's an irrefutable. So if what comes out tonight, it'll be motivated by that. It's not motivated by a desire to impose kind of and remove the terrorist threat out of Afghanistan. The war's lost in Syria effectively. The war's lost in Iraq, although the battles still continue. But from an Afghan point of view, there is absolutely no doubt, if the decision to send more troops in will be purely a fudged US intelligence operation that says, oh, these are the reasons why we need to do it. But the real backstory is purely it's an economic reason. Because it's another thing, if the US economy is ailing and that supply chain is cut off or curtailed in some way, it's another hammer blow to the US economy, and they will not want that to happen. It's another example why they're desperately trying to do everything to prop everything up and keep the lie and the illusion going, whereas economic reality, and we've said this before many times, is biting very hard now, and that is equally irrefutable. And we see it everywhere. It's not just in the US, and although we focus a lot on the US, you certainly see it in other economies, and the UK is a good example of that as well. Although maybe not quite to the same extent, but certainly there are economic problems, and they'll just massage the data. Even all the jobs come, they put all the NFP out, and then they massage the data, all this seasonally adjusted bullshit. And it's just and then, oh, the GDP growth is going to be this, and then we've adjusted it. Oh, this is the figure. Oh no, but a few months later, well, actually, we had to, reduce it by another 0.5%. It's all part of the illusion, all part of the lie, but it's also all part of this game of the alt left, alt right, and why it's an attempt to utterly destroy the US internally and get the people to do their job for them. And that's why it's not my country, but I care about it as a nation. I've got a lot of friends and people we know, and and I want the US to not go down the tubes. But if it goes down the tubes because of the economic problems, that's bad enough. But if it becomes a self-inflicted wound by the American people in the process, because they're being duped and lied to and convinced to polarize themselves, that would be a tragedy that would live long in history and stick very badly in my throat. And I'm not even American. So, a closing summary that went on for 5 minutes, but I think, basically we just have to hope that common sense prevails and that doesn't get out of control. If we have odd sporadic events happening and they don't blow out of control, it will die a death. It will, there has been attempts before to do things in the US and no one bit on it, and it just died a death and went away. And no one kind of fell for it. And it's really important that all American people don't get sucked into that agenda, because it's very damaging to the American people in the process.
Right, exactly.
But in terms of what we do, obviously the website's the SiriusReport.com, SIRIUS. We've got the Twitter page at the Sirius Report, which we're actually utilizing a lot more. We put quite a few articles lately, which Rogue Money have very kindly reproduced and put on their site. So thank you very much for that.
No problem.
We obviously have the Facebook page, which is just the Sirius Report. And yes, we do have the premium podcast, which is $4.75 a month. We think it's very good value. And I have to say, after the X22, we got quite a lot of interest in that regard. So thank you to everyone there who's, if they're listening to this, and hopefully they are, then, thank you to all them for subscribing as well. And we just want to grow what we're doing and just provide a better and better service. And to be honest, I look back when I started and I think we've improved from my perspective a lot. And I think we're doing a better job. And I want to look back in a year's time and go, do you know what, we're doing an even better job, because that's what it's all about. We want to progress and to work with Rogue Money and other people, because we have to get the reality out there and the truth and the perspective that people need, and to be deliver it in a calm, mannered way rather than foaming at the mouth. Even though deep down a lot of things are very annoying and very irritating, but we have to deliver it in a way that people will relate to it and not switch off because we are foaming at the mouth in the process.
Exactly correct. Exactly correct. Then that wraps it up. Paul, thank you so much for the very detailed information, man. A lot of stuff. I recommend people re-listen to this broadcast again. Have your notebook ready and start jotting notes. There's a chock full of juicy intel that Paul just dropped on us. So thank you again, Paul. And again, guys, follow him on Twitter at the Sirius Report, and check out his YouTube channel, the Sirius Report YouTube channel as well as a site. And make sure you subscribe to that valuable subscriber service. With that being said, CJ, take it away, buddy.